Okay. Well, let's get to it. Today, I wanted to begin our journey into a few particular passages together. I think most of them will be familiar to you, uh, but I wanted to just spend a little time the next several sessions together, giving attention to some of those passages which really detail particular events in the future. And I think have been many would call sort of the core passages in building our eschatology because of the fact that they do provide specific details, also a sequence, and I think have been very helpful to the church over the centuries in giving us particular insights. Again, remembering that these passages always come within a particular context, as we've talked about before. And we want to remember that as we dive into them, that as we seek to understand maybe the particulars of what they communicate, to not forget that they are part of a broader message by the author to particularly his original audience, but then it's important that we understand not only the specifics of the events, but also maybe why the author has written about those events and placed that particular prophecy within in the location that he does within the book. All right. Now, probably among the most helpful, uh, most specific prophecies we have in terms of timelines would be Daniel's 70 weeks. And I thought I wanted to start there because the book of Daniel is a book all about the kingdom of God. You know, we talked about that in the last few sessions together, just that theme of God's kingdom throughout human history. And really, Daniel is, I would put near the top of the list as far as books focused on that theme. Of course, written, during the exile and written after the exile, but covering the events of Daniel's life during the exile. And he wrote that book really to emphasize the sovereign hand of God in the affairs of men, particularly among the nations. If you look at almost every chapter, it's dealing uh, with God's sovereignty in a global setting, or at least even over a particular empire. As you look at Daniel 1, right? King Nebuchadnezzar has brought Daniel into exile, along with several other exiles in the first siege in 605 BC. And remember, a common practice in the ancient Near East was when a people was defeated, often the defeating country would come in and take out the choicest men to serve with the king, young men, typically in their teenage years. In fact, some extra biblical and documents have been found which describe, I think it was the Persians doing this practice where they would look for young men around 13 or 14 years old, and they would train them for 3 years. And actually, if you carefully look at Daniel chapter 1, that's exactly what the Daniel says about himself, that the practice of the Babylonians was to take these young men and train them for 3 years. And so, again, we have from extra biblical documents, the age is about 14 to 17 when that's typically done. And Daniel probably was close to that age, given the fact that he's still alive at the end of the exile. And that means he couldn't have been much more than 20, most likely under 20 when he was taken. Because at the end of the exile, and if he was older than 20, he'd be like in his 90s, which could be possible. But I think given what we know, it's likely Daniel was 14, 15 years old when he's taken. And of course, then he refuses to eat the king's food because of the fact it was not kosher. He didn't want to defile himself. Then, of course, we had Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the statue. Anyone remember that dream? And maybe summarize it for us. Who remembers Daniel 2, the dream of the statue with the head of gold? Jason, you remember that one?
I'm Pastor. I'm looking at Daniel chapter. I think Daniel chapter 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
It was that statue that had the gold head and the silver
yeah, the head of the
chest.
statue made of fine gold, and the breasts and the arms of silver, and the belly and its thighs are bronze, and the legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay.
Yeah. And Daniel described that, he interpreted that dream as the Babylon was the head and the
Yeah.
Persia was the chest. Well, he just said there were 4 kingdoms following one another. And then at the end of the dream, there was a giant stone that crushes all of the statue, indicating that stone is the kingdom of God, as Daniel says, and that kingdom would last forever. And so really, we see that again in Daniel 7 when Daniel has the vision of this 4 beasts. And each beast represents a kingdom, same 4 kingdoms. And then Daniel sees one like a son of man come up to the Ancient of Days and receive a kingdom. I think we read that verse last week. And so we really see this emphasis throughout the book on the sovereign hand of God among the nations, and then accomplishing his work and establishing his kingdom through his Messiah. And Daniel 9 comes along. And in this chapter, it's very interesting in the sequence of events that are described in this chapter. So, what I wanted to do is give us this idea of the context first. So, we'll start in verse 1, and I'll have you guys read some verses from that. And then just want to look at a little bit of the background before we dive into the specific prophecy regarding the 70 weeks. All right. So, with that, let's move our attention to Daniel 9. All right, so I've got this split up a little bit. Let me ask Ence if you could read verses 1 to 4, and Tabs, it looks like I saw you just joined us. If you could read Tabs verses 5 to 7.
Okay, Pastor.
Good
Good,
evening.
good morning, everyone.
All right, let's start. Daniel chapter 9, verses 1 to 4. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of Median descent, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, observed in the books of the number of the years, which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. So I gave my attention to the Lord God to seek him by prayer and supplications with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. I prayed to the Lord my God and confessed and said, Alas, O Lord, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant and loving kindness for those who love him and keep his commandments.
5 to 7, we have committed iniquity after the wicked he had rebelled, even turning aside from your commandments and ordinances. Moreover, we have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, our fathers, and all the people of the land. Righteousness belongs to you, O Lord, but to us open shame, as it is this day, to the men of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and all Israel, those who are nearby, and those who are far away, in all the countries to which you have driven them, because of their unfaithful deeds which they have committed against you.
Great, thank you. All right, so here's how the chapter begins. Notice Daniel gives the timestamp, the first year of Darius. So what does that tell us about the time period here? Ence, you read those verses. Where are we in the time?
This is the time when King Darius took over the kingdom of Babylon from Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay, so when when is this roughly? Like, do you remember? Or does anyone remember?
The Medo-Persian
Empire.
Yeah, notice King
Empire.
Darius is of Median descent. Yeah, this was right. We're going from the head of gold now to the chest of silver. This is the kingdom of Persia, who remember Daniel 5 was the handwriting on the wall, and that Daniel interpreted that as that was a declaration by God that the kingdom was going to be taken from the Babylonians, given into the hand of the Persians, and then that very night it actually happened. The end of Daniel 5 tells us that they were defeated, and we learned from 2 Chronicles 36 and Ezra chapter 1 that it was Cyrus. He was the king of Persia at that time, and he was the one who was reigning. And this Darius, if you did some particular study, Darius was a Mede who was part of the Persian Empire. And apparently Cyrus appointed him as king over the Babylonian region. Notice that he was made king over kingdom of the Chaldeans. So it's not unusual that he's called a king. Remember, Herod was called king of Israel in the days of Jesus, and he wasn't the primary ruler of the Roman Empire. He was appointed that position by the emperor. And in this case, same thing with Darius. He's not the king over the entire Persian Empire. He was appointed to rule this particular region. There's another Darius that we learn about in Ezra, who he was another Persian king further down the line from Cyrus. Okay, so this is another guy, but then the Darius here. So in any case, in this first year of Darius, which means this is the first year of the Persian rule. Okay, so that means we are around 539, 538 BC. And Daniel notes this year is a particularly important year. What does he tell us about this year? Look at verse 2.
It's the fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy.
Yes. What about his prophecy specifically?
That the Israelites would return to their land after 70 years of exile.
Yeah, did you guys catch that? The 70 years. That was something, if you remember, I think I've got it here. Yeah, Jeremiah predicted it in two places in his book, right? This whole land will be a desolation and a horror. He's speaking of Judah. And these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Well, guess what? Babylon ruled over Israel, Judah, for about 70 years. And then Cyrus came in, and in his first year, Cyrus released several Jews to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, right? That's going on the side here. Daniel doesn't mention that, but what he does mention is, and this is very interesting, how did he figure out, or what did he recognize from the fact it's the end of the 70 years? What did Daniel now expect or remember? Again, verse 2.
You remembered the prophecy of Jeremiah.
Right. How did he remember that?
He observed it in the books.
Yeah. So what's the significance of this? Just I think it's important to talk about this a minute. What does this mean Daniel was doing, and what did he have access to? What did he know about? Tabs, were you gonna?
I think he had access to I guess the books of the Old Testament, and he was studying them, and he was, I think, by using the word observe, he was not just reading them, but really studying them in depth to understand what they meant.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is a good example of the fact that many times people, even in the Old Testament, had access to the Word of God. And so here, notice it says, Daniel, I observed in the books. So he had access to, he had the scrolls of Jeremiah written by Baruch, or a copy of them. And he had been studying them. Now remember, Jeremiah was a contemporary of Daniel. Jeremiah was alive and prophesied during the before and during the exile. So Jeremiah was taken into Egypt during the third siege. So remember, he had the first siege of Babylon was in 605. That's when Daniel was taken. And then the second siege was about 19 years later in 587, when Ezekiel was taken. And the third siege, this is the one in which the temple was destroyed, the city was completely destroyed of Jerusalem. The third siege was, 597 was Ezekiel was taken. 586 was when the third siege happened, and Jeremiah ended up in Egypt because a bunch of people ran off to Egypt and took him. And so in any case, though, Jeremiah was prophesied before and during the exile. And in his prophecy, only in a couple places does he mention the specific number of years. I think these are the two passages. So Daniel read the book, understood it enough to note, to pick up on the fact that this 70 years he took literally, by the way. Okay. I say that on purpose. All right. So here we have a prophecy fulfilled literally. The number 70 wasn't some, made up figurative number. Daniel actually took it literally, right? And so he sees that, or remembers that, as he was studying the scrolls of Jeremiah. He remembers, wait a minute, right? The word of Yahweh came to Jeremiah and talked about this consequences in exile would be 70 years. All right. So he's being informed by Scripture, by promises of God in Scripture. And so now he's going to speak to God about those promises. And then in verse 3, it summarizes, okay, because of the fact that the 70 years are up, I gave my attention to the Lord God to seek him by prayer and supplication. And notice this is an earnest prayer, fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. And then his prayer begins in verse 4. How would you characterize, I'll come back to Entz since he started this. How would you characterize Daniel's prayer here? How does he begin his prayer? What is his focus?
God's unchanging character and his greatness, his awesomeness, loving kindness, keeping his covenant.
Yep. So he points to that, God's faithfulness is keeping his promises. And then as we get to verse 5, Tabs, I know you read this part. How would you summarize sort of the tone in verses 5? What does he focus on here?
I think, Pastor, the tone would be a tone of confession.
Yes.
Confessing of sins to the Lord.
Yeah. Exactly, right? We have sinned. We've committed iniquity. We've acted wickedly, rebelled. Moreover, we have not listened to your servants, right? He accepts the just assessment of God and confesses the sin of his people, including himself as a sinner, right? Righteousness belongs to you, O Lord, to us open shame. So God, we deserve what you've done. We brought it on ourselves. And then Daniel continues in this. here I just summarized those three sieges by Babylon. So he's repentant here, and if we were to keep going, in fact, I think I've got a few more verses. Yeah, pick it up in verse 18 here. Let's notice the tone of his prayer. Let me ask Athan if you could read this one, Athan, verses 18 and 19 here on the screen.
Daniel 9:18 and 19. Oh my God, incline your ear and hear, open your eyes and see our desolations and the city which is called by your name. For we are not presenting our supplications before you on account of any merits of our own, but on account of your great compassion. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, listen and take action. For your own sake, oh my God, do not delay, because your city and your own people are called by your name.
Thank you. Okay, how would you characterize the tone here, this part of his prayer? This is as he ends his prayer.
Tone here is an appeal
Yes.
for God to act still, even though they have sinned, to remember his mercy and covenant to his people
Yeah.
for his sake.
Yeah, it's a good summary. That really expresses here, and I didn't have us read the whole prayer, but this is really just the line of the whole prayer is one of contrition, confession, a humbling, an acceptance of God as being righteous and just in his decisions, but also an appeal to God to fulfill his promise and to do it without delay. And notice the translation here puts these exclamation points. Oh Lord, hear. Oh Lord, forgive. Take action. And I think that's interpretive, but I think it's appropriate. If you look at the original Hebrew, there's terms of appeal there, and it's this earnestness that he expresses. And in fact, we see that even being described here in the next section. Robbie, you want to read this 20 to 23, verses 20 to 23?
20 to 23. Now, while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel and presenting my supplication before the Lord, my God, in behalf of the holy mountain of my God, while I was still speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision previously, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. He gave instruction and talked with me and said, "O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you insight with understanding. At the beginning of your supplications, the command was issued, and I have to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. So give heed to the message and gain understanding of the vision."
Okay. So here, following the prayer, what happens? Maybe kind of summarize this, Robbie, since you read it. How would you summarize this?
While he was speaking, God was already answering, and he sent the messenger Gabriel to let him know that.
And how earnest would you say his prayer was, or what do we see here that tells us how fervent Daniel was in his prayers?
He was weary.
Yeah, did you guys catch that?
It seemed like he was praying for a long period of time.
In my extreme weariness. So while I was speaking, and notice Daniel says as well, confessing my sin and the sin of my people. So again, Daniel doesn't go, it was my forefathers, it's their problem. He takes ownership himself. By the way, again, he was alive before the exile, lived at least into his teen years. But he himself engaged in a very passionate, earnest, fervent zealous, emotional prayer, because again, he says he was extremely weary at the end of it. And we're given this portion of his prayer, but notice it probably was taking place over a period of time, because it happens that it mentions here that at the time of the evening offering, the angel appears to him while he was speaking in prayer. So this prayer that we're given is just probably a portion of what Daniel was praying. And an angel, Gabriel, in fact, one of the chief messengers used by God. Remember, who was it that came to Mary, by the way, to tell her of the Messiah in her womb? Yeah. So Gabriel was really the main messenger angel that was used by God. And in this case, he's the one who is sent to Daniel. And what was he sent to do, Gabriel?
To say that God was already answering the prayer as soon as Daniel began to supplicate.
Yeah, remember, what was Daniel's prayer? God, fulfill your promise to your people. Right? Keep your covenants. Show mercy. And here now, Gabriel is dispatched, comes to Daniel and says, Daniel, I want to give you insight and understanding, because as you prayed, and apparently we learn here, I guess it takes some time, to get from where Gabriel was to where Daniel is, right? Because at the beginning of your supplications, the command was issued, and I've come to tell you. So he didn't appear in an instant, for whatever reason. It took him some time, apparently, to get there. He arrives, and notice twice, give you insight and understanding, to give heed to the message, gain understanding of the vision. Okay, so the point here is God, through Gabriel, wanted Daniel to know something, to have insight about something, and that something would be in regards to what? What's the context, guys? In regards to?
The fulfillment of God's promise after 70 years.
Exactly. Keeping his covenant regarding his people. Notice again how he ends the prayer. Open your eyes, see the desolation of the city. On account of your compassion, O Lord, hear, forgive, listen, take action for your own sake. Oh my God, do not delay, because your city and your people are called by your name. Okay, again, this is important as we enter into looking at what Gabriel tells him. And now let's get to that. Any questions yet so far before we look to that? Context clear? Okay. This is how you want to study prophecy, guys. You got to understand what's leading up to the future events being described. That's key. All right. So we've seen leading up to these events is Daniel's prayer, his recognition of God's promise of 70 years of exile, that Jerusalem would be in Judah would be in desolation. But now that period is over or up. The 7 years have passed, and so he's appealing to God to fulfill his promise, keep his word, to show mercy, to show compassion to his people and to the city. And then Gabriel is sent, and this is what the message is that he wants Daniel to understand. Now, Manny, you have the honor to read us what Gabriel said.
Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 to 27. 70 weeks have been declared, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 70 7 weeks and 62 weeks, it will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war. Desolations are determined, and he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate.
All right. Let's break this down. Let's just kind of go through it a verse at a time. All right. Now I want to draw your attention to a few things in verse 24. What sticks out to you? Let's just make a few observations. All right. And Manny, not just you don't have to be the only one to answer, but any of you guys looking at verse 24 here. What are some things that stick out to you that you notice, observe?
Pastor, the repetition of that theme of the end to sin.
Okay. Make an end of sin. Finish the transgression. Make atonement for iniquity. Okay. Again, remember Daniel's prayer. And notice here, his prayer partly was up for forgiveness, right? That God would forgive. Remember that he would that he would hear, that he would show mercy. Okay. What else?
Also, does the phrase to seal out vision
Can't really hear you, Tab. There's a lot of noise around you.
Oh, sorry. To seal up vision and prophecy, does that mean fulfilling? To fulfill? To seal means to fulfill? I'm just curious about that.
Sorry, I can't make out what you said very clearly. Did you say about the vision?
No, the phrase to seal up vision.
Oh, seal up the vision.
Does that mean to fulfill it? Or to finish it? Is that what it means?
I think
anyone catch that question?
The second part, after the repetition of the forgiveness of the sins that Daniel had earlier confessed, it was now the declaration of fulfilling the vision and the prophecy.
You're lagging, Pastor Robs. I think we missed some portion of your statement.
Oh, I'm sorry. After the forgiving of the sins that Daniel had confessed, the last part was really the fulfillment of the vision, a declaration that God would fulfill the vision and the prophecy.
Yeah, I think he had a question about that, to seal up the vision and the prophecy, if that meant to fulfill. I think that's what I heard.
Yeah.
From Tab.
He wrote it, Pastor Tim here, Pastor Tabs wrote it in the
in the
chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Does it mean to fulfill? Yeah, normally, right, a seal had the idea of, yeah, confirming, normally I think the idea of to seal up a letter, or like a signet ring would give a seal. I think that's the seal he's talking about. And that normally meant sort of right, something that you're confirming, something that you are affirming as certain. I think it's that idea, because when you would finish a letter or document, you would seal it up, put a wax on it. And if it was a royal document, you would fix the seal on it with your signet ring, and that would mean that it's confirmed, it's protected. It has a air of that seal sort of represents authority regarding that, something along those lines. So this is, I think, the way I would take this would be along in that vein of just this idea of a confirming. Yeah, maybe fulfill, but maybe more of the idea of that, like, okay, I'm gonna write this down, seal it up, like this is gonna happen. Document it, it's confirmed. I think that's the best I can do. But notice, did you guys pick up on the first word?
Yes, Pastor, 70 weeks.
70. Why do you think the word number 70 is there? What had just happened? Or what was the context here?
The 70 years had ended.
Yeah, another 70 is very prominent in this chapter, isn't it? The 70 years of exile. So Gabriel says, Daniel, I'm going to tell you about another 70. All right. So I don't think it's no accident that he chooses this. Now, literally, it's 77s. Okay. Weeks is the common expression given. That's the typical translation, but it's not the word weeks. It's actually the number 7. It's literally 77s have been decreed. All right. Now, 7 what? That's the question. Is it 70 minutes, hours, days, months, years, or something else? And it's 77s, so it's 7 of something. It's 70 units of 7 of something. And as we go through the prophecy, we'll see it can't be literal weeks, right? Because events described here take place over a much longer period of time. The most, again, think of the context, they've been in exile 70 years. So God's telling him, let me tell you about a 77s. And I think the most reasonable interpretation of that would be 77s of years. Okay. And as we look at this, we're going to, we can look backwards now because some of the events here have been fulfilled. So we can see that's exactly what makes sense. But even in the context, again, I'm just trying to show you guys, sometimes people just sort of, oh, it's prophecy. So, we're talking here about symbols and figurative language and blah, 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 blah. It's like, wait a minute, hold on. Before you do that, now it's possible there are symbols in prophetic genre. There's figurative language. I'm not saying there is not, but you need to have a justification from the text that guides us in that direction. And if I understand the context, so, I'm Daniel, I'm praying, Lord, it's been 70 years. Please show mercy, fulfill your covenant to your people. We've deserved your judgment. We've been sinners, please show mercy, hear us, forgive us. And then the first words from Gabriel are 77s. have been decreed.
Mm.
Okay, what seems most natural in this context? You know, before
Take
we,
it literally.
yeah, 70 literal periods of 7, which again, years make sense from the context. Daniel prays, says, I've noticed it's been 70 years. Please deliver us as you promised. Gabriel says, Daniel, 77s have been decreed. In response to your prayer, 77s have been, how did he say? Yeah, decreed. For, again, your people, who's that?
Israel.
The people of God at some time in the future. It could be anybody will receive these promises.
Oh.
No. Your people in the context.
Your
Who is
people,
that?
Israel. Yeah.
The Jews.
Israel. Jews.
Your holy city. What is that?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
No. It's the church. Come on, guys. You paying attention? I mean, it really, again, unless the context directs us differently, let's just understand it as what would be the natural contextual, and that's Jerusalem. What has Daniel been concerned about? Your people, God, you know, in our city, your city is desolate. God, are you going to restore us? You know, what did, again, go back to his prayer. Sorry, his prayer, open your eyes and see our desolation, the city which is called by your name. What city is that? All right. And then again, verse 19, do not delay what? For fulfilling your covenant to restore us, because your city and your people, who are that? And then again, in Daniel's prayer, he's been talking about, notice, while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people, Israel. All right. And then the very next verses, that Gabriel says, okay, here's 77s have been decreed for your people and your holy city. All right. So clear. Right? Nothing in the context is taking us any other direction but to take this literally. There's nothing here to tell us something, some other spiritual or symbolic meaning is going on here. Not even figurative. Even the weeks is not a figurative number. It's just 7s. 77s. And he chose that specifically, as we're going to see in a minute. 77s have been decreed for your people, people of Israel, and your holy city, Jerusalem, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make an atonement for iniquity. Now, this sounds like a little more than what Daniel was asking for, doesn't it? Daniel was just saying, Lord, forgive us and restore us to the city. Here, I think God's taking it a little further. Finish and make atonement. Bigger picture here. To bring an everlasting righteousness. Do you see these sort of long-term descriptors here? And again, it's regarding to anoint the most holy, and place was the probably the right idea in the context here. Again, we're talking about Jerusalem. Okay. All right. You guys see that? Again, we can assume right now, we don't, let's just pretend we're in the days of Daniel. We don't know anything about what happens actually, right? We're just going to try to read this and hear it as Daniel heard it initially. And this is what I think the most natural interpretation is, 77s have been decreed. And the 7s here, I believe, makes the most sense that these are 70 periods of 7 years. Okay, so he's linking this to Daniel's prayer. So we need to understand this prophecy in the context and in light of Daniel's prayer. All right.
Mhm.
Comments or questions, thoughts before we move on?
No, I was just about to say that the Lord answered Daniel's prayer by giving him a prophecy of something else that would happen.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, he's answering his prayer by really expanding on the fulfillment of his promise. So it's not just about restoration of the people in that day, but he wants to give him something that extends from them to beyond. So it's like it's a much broader answer, I guess that's what you were getting at. He didn't just respond or answer his specific concern, but God wants to give him the big picture here in connection to his concern. All right, well, let's keep going. Let's look at verse 25. All right, again, we see those terms. So you are to know and discern. So again, remember Gabriel. What did Gabriel tell Daniel? That he wanted to give him understanding, knowledge. So he said, okay, Daniel, pay attention here. Understand this. And then what is it that he is called to understand here? What do we see taking place? Verse 25. What does Gabriel start to unfold?
That from the issuing of a decree to restore to rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, the Prince. There's a mention of the Messiah.
Okay. Yes. So we have
And the
rebuild
rebuilding of
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
Again, notice holy city, Jerusalem. Okay, Daniel, it's going to happen. You prayed, the city's made desolate. It's been destroyed. You're asking me to look, to respond, to restore. Okay. So the decree to restore, rebuild Jerusalem. So that's going to happen. But then he goes beyond that and says, from that time until Messiah.
Mhm.
Yeah, here the term Mashiach, which if you remember, Isaiah was the first to use that term in reference to the coming one. This would have been about 70, 180 years prior. All right. He spoke of the Messiah at a few times in his prophecy. So from the decree of a rebuild of Jerusalem, Messiah the Prince will be how long?
7 weeks and 62 weeks.
Yeah, and I like to just say 7. It just kind of reminds me it's not a week here. I know classically they're called weeks. I understand that. But 77, 7 sevens plus 62 sevens. How many sevens is that? All you math majors?
69.
69. 69 sevens. Okay. And again, if we take that as years, 7 periods of years, it's 69 periods of 7 years.
Mhm.
All right. That'd be the most natural understanding from the context. What is going to happen? It will be that period of time, 69 periods of 7 years, which equals 483 years from rebuilding Jerusalem to Messiah the Prince.
Mhm.
Wow. This is amazing, guys. Here Daniel's given a specific period of time to the arrival of Messiah. That's stunning. again, if I don't read into this, if I don't assume symbolic things, if I don't, no figurative, if I'm just taking it as it comes, that God is responding to Daniel's prayer and said, yes, Daniel, I will restore, I will rebuild Jerusalem, I will forgive. Let me tell you of this process of the forgiveness, an end of sin that I'm going to bring about. Here we go. You ready, Daniel? Here it is. Okay. From the time of restoring Jerusalem until Messiah, again, context, the theme here is restoration of God's people, forgiveness, make an atonement of iniquity. This thing's packed. It's full of details.
Yeah.
So it's 24, I would take sort of as a summary. 25, he's now getting into the details. All right. Let me. '25 and on, details. Okay. And those details are this. From the time of rebuilding Jerusalem. Now, he doesn't say when this is going to happen. Probably in Daniel's mind, he's thinking, right after, at the end of the 70 years. But we know historically, actually, it was a little period of time before Jerusalem was rebuilt. Notice he says rebuild Jerusalem. He didn't say rebuild the temple.
Yeah.
Okay. He was specific there, I believe. We're talking in the text here, context, the holy city, right? Jerusalem. So from the rebuilding of Jerusalem, which did not happen right away, the temple was rebuilt in 20 years following the exile, right? You guys studied Zechariah, right? Remember? 50,000 exiles came back in 536 at the decree of Cyrus. There was a delay. They started rebuilding the temple, and then there was a 16-year delay. Then they finished, and then by 20 years, they had completed the temple, but the city was still in ruins. How do we know that? Remember, there's another person God raised up to rebuild the city, the walls anyway. That was Nehemiah. Okay. They rebuilt their houses. They reestablished their life. But as far as a city with walls and protection, really that didn't happen until 445. All right. So let's put some numbers here. So if we understand rebuilding Jerusalem as in the days of Nehemiah, it's described in Nehemiah, book of Ezra and Nehemiah. That was by using some dates from extra biblical literature around 445 BC. I won't go into details of how that number is attained, but it's a pretty solid number. All right. So let's do a little math here. So from the time of rebuilding Jerusalem, again, that would not have been known by Daniel specifically. He probably thought, again, it was going to be right away. It was going to be 445. Now, this 483 years, we have to remember, this is based on a lunar calendar, right? 30 days a month. So that's 360 days a year. Okay. So to convert to Gregorian calendar, which this one is, this is from the Gregorian calendar. Remember, Gregorian was developed around 1580, I think, something like that. It's when actually the Jesuit priests figured out the sort of this dating calendar. The only decent thing the Jesuit priests ever did. I thought you'd appreciate that. So they came up with a Gregorian calendar, which actually is very accurate, very good calendar. And if you use that, they had in the Gregorian calendar, it's 365, really 0.25 days per year, right? There's a leap year. And if we understand that, then really 483 years on the lunar calendar would be 476 years on the Gregorian calendar. Okay? So all we're doing is we're not playing in numbers games here. We're just like converting from a lunar calendar to a Gregorian.
Yeah.
so that we could understand it using the BC and AD terminology, the way we date things. So what that would mean is 460 years from 445 BC puts us where? Puts us around. So that would mean the Messiah, the Messiah, the Prince, would be 445 BC, give or take, plus 476 years, which would put us around yeah,
Interesting.
interesting. Now again, we might be off a year or two here or there, but that number should stick out to us as an important or recognizable number, because that is essentially, again, using the Gregorian calendar, Jesus probably born around 3 or 4 BC. AD 30 was the year of and notice what is described in the next verse.
The Messiah will be cut off.
After the 62 sevens, so again, at the end of the 69, the Messiah will be cut off. Normally, that term had the idea of rejected, thrown out, removed, but can also at times refer to being killed. He'll be cut off and have nothing. All right. Likely refers to his death, but at a minimum that he would be put to shame, rejected. That's what that term could mean. Now, we looking back can say, oh, well, it was referring to his death. But again, the idea from Daniel's perspective could have incorporated any of these ideas here. But death certainly would have been part of that. So the Messiah is going to be cut off. And then what? The people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city. What city?
Jerusalem.
How do you know that?
From the context.
Yeah. What city's been talked about in the whole chapter? Okay. And how about sanctuary?
The temple.
The temple. Now again, I'm sorry to belabor this, guys, but I really want to pound this home. You can understand a lot just by knowing the context. Okay, so the city, Jerusalem, sanctuary. What's the sanctuary in Jerusalem? Temple. Now, what was the condition of Jerusalem and the sanctuary at the time Daniel was given this prophecy?
About to be rebuilt.
Destroyed.
Destroyed completely, right? Temple burned down, decimated, everything taken out of it, right? Remember, Belshazzar was, they had the holy utensils from the temple that they were eating and drinking out of. And right, temple was burnt down, not one stone laid upon another, right? The only part left was just one section of the wall, if that even. I think everything was destroyed, right? And so, and the city is destroyed. So here in the future, God says Jerusalem will be rebuilt, and implied in that was that the temple would be as well, which we'll see
Ezra.
coming verse, right? Yeah, Athan, did you have something?
The rebuilding will be in Ezra time.
Yeah, that's when the wall is rebuilt. And of course, the temple was rebuilt in the next 20 years after Daniel received this prophecy. But what's going to happen in the future, in the time of the Messiah, which is going to be 469 periods of 7 years, 483 years from the rebuilding of Jerusalem? What was going to happen to Jerusalem?
It's going to be destroyed again.
It's going to be destroyed again. and the temple will be destroyed again. You're thinking, oh, wait a minute, this isn't going to be good news for Daniel. Daniel was just praying, Lord, restore the city. You know, God said it will be restored, but it's going to get destroyed again. All right. So again, the Lord's broadened the scope here of what he's going to answer regarding Daniel's prayer. Both will be destroyed, and its end will come with a flood. Now, that probably is figurative. Okay, so because it wasn't by flood that it was destroyed. But this thing is a figurative expression. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. Again, both will be destroyed, and it will be a period again of desolation. Which again, in the context, the background here, the setting, the picture of their mind, Daniel's mind would be, you know, the city's desolate now. It's destroyed now. It's gonna be rebuilt, but that's gonna happen again. Okay, now. Someone else is mentioned here, the people and the prince. Okay, now some of our amillennial brothers like to connect the prince here to the Messiah, because the Messiah is also called the prince in verse 25, isn't he? And it is the same word in both cases, but is it the same person? Can't be. Can't be, right? By the way, prince is simply just a reference to a regal, a regal nature. But here, the Messiah is cut off, but the people of the prince who come will destroy the city. If the prince is the Messiah, then who would the people of the prince be?
Supposed to be the Jews.
That would be the Jews. So the Jews in the future are going to destroy the city and the temple? Okay, that's a possible interpretation, but does that make sense here in the context? In the context, the people, it's your people, remember, your city. Here he's talking about the people of the prince, who is to come, will destroy. All right, the Messiah will have nothing. Okay, he's done. But the people of the prince, this is somebody else. Okay. It's another people who will destroy the temple and Jerusalem in the future. Right? Any argument here? Disagreement? If you do, that's okay. Or questions? So who is this prince? Well, we don't know.
Titus.
Huh? Sorry, someone had an answer.
Sorry, Pastor Tim. Is that Titus the Roman general who destroyed Jerusalem and the temple?
Yeah, I mean, there are different theories, but as far as from the passage itself, we don't know yet, right? This is a new guy, right, on the scene. This is somebody being introduced here. Nothing said about him, only that he is the prince who is to come and that he has a people. Okay. Now, again, it's hard to look at this without looking at it from our point of time. All right. So I get that. And that's a challenge. But what we first want to try to do, and I did that already a little bit with this discussion of the 69 sevens. All right. From Daniel's time, he wouldn't know that. But he wouldn't know the specific dates. All right. But he would know the time period, 483 years from the time of rebuilding Jerusalem. Okay, now that's the part Daniel wouldn't know when this is the rebuilding. But he does know the course of events in relation to that rebuilding. And he knows that at the end of this time, that after the 69 sevens, the 7 plus 72, that the Messiah would come. All right, that much he could know. The details of like the specific dates he could not. And then here in verse 26, when the Messiah does come at the end of the 69 sevens, after the 62 sevens, which follows the 7 sevens, the Messiah is cut off. The people of the prince, so this is another group of people, another prince who is to come, will destroy the city and the sanctuary. It's him will come, so it's going to be a heavy destruction, is the idea. All right, so the prince is somebody we don't know yet. Let's look at verse 27. And he, who's the he?
The prince.
The prince. Okay, now we're given a little more detail about the prince, right? Because if you look back, the he, that's the nearest antecedent. The pronoun. And, okay, it makes sense. He, that is the prince, Harris says Titus. But let's see. He will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 7. Not a week, a 7. 1 7. How many sevens are left of the 70 that Gabriel told us about? That he started with?
1 7.
70 sevens, what he started with. Then he said 7 sevens plus 62 sevens takes us from rebuild to Messiah.
Yeah. 69 sevens.
Okay, now he's dealing with 1 7.
1 7.
Okay. The 70, and this is called by many the 70th week. Many refer to this as Daniel's 70th week, or I would say again, 70th 7. What does that mean? That is the last 7-year period. Okay? Because again, in the context, 7 weeks have been described, or 7 sevens have been described, 62 sevens, and now 1 7. The last 7. And what's going to happen in that 7?
The prince will make a covenant.
Yeah, he'll make a covenant with the many. Now, in the context, who would the many be? What's the only other group of people that are in this passage?
Yeah, the Jews, Israel.
Right? They're the only other people mentioned. Okay. So this prince, again, the prince of the people who destroyed Jerusalem. So there's a connection between them. He will make a covenant with the many for 1 7. But in the middle of the 7, what's going to happen?
To stop the sacrifice and offering.
Yeah. In the middle, he's going to stop sacrifice and grain offering. So what does that tell us has happened regarding the temple?
Oh, they revived the sacrificing and the offerings.
Yeah, which means what?
Celebration.
What does it say? Tell us about the temple.
Oh, that means it was built.
Yes.
Built.
These are helpful dates to keep in your mind. Let's see. Shoot. I'm guessing. I don't remember exactly. I may be off a little here. Solomon's temple was around 910-ish, I think. Does anyone remember more accurately? That sound close? Somewhere in there.
Sounds close.
Right. 586 is destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. .516 temple rebuilt by Zerubbabel. And then sometime in the future, after Messiah, temple destroyed. By whom? The people of the prince. Okay. Then we have, of course, we know, we can fill this in when that happened by the Romans.
Tim,
Yeah.
can we also say that that portion that says he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, the sacrifice and grain offering confirms that the many before that really referred to the people of Israel?
Yeah, good point. Note that would have to be right, given by the Jews. So if the covenant is with them, and the idea here is that covenant is broken because he puts a stop to the sacrifice and grain offering. So yeah, good observation. Again, just looking at the passage itself, right? And from the context, the many would be assumed to be them, and then even within the immediate context of verse 27, that's a good observation. All right, so we have the temple and the city destroyed. Again, from Daniel's point of view, sometime after the time of the Messiah, and then it must be sometime after that, temple is rebuilt. Okay. And again, we think of in Zechariah 14, the Messiah reigns from the temple. Right, the temple, we see the temple is rebuilt there. Zechariah, remember, prophesies about 20 years after this prophecy from Daniel. Okay. Actually, sorry, Zechariah 14, maybe later than that, maybe 30, 40, 50 years after. But, within a generation or two. Okay, but that's what tells us that the temple, so this is another temple. So first temple destroyed, Nebuchadnezzar, second temple rebuilt under Zerubbabel, and then it's modified by Herod. So at some point, a third temple is rebuilt. All right, and that one, because there's sacrifice and grain offering. Remember, when the people came back, they had not been giving sacrifice, grain offering, because the altar had to be the altar in front of the temple. They had to make sacrifice at that spot. So they waited. And remember, that's the first thing they built when they returned to Jerusalem from the decree of Cyrus. Within within the year, they had rebuilt the altar and began offering sacrifices again. And then they laid the foundation of the temple, and then it stopped for 16 years. Okay, so again, the Jews would wait for the temple to be rebuilt, the altar to be rebuilt before sacrifice would be made. That's why we know the temple must be rebuilt, the third one. All right, because offering sacrifice be made. Well, Prince makes covenant with the many, people of Israel. And in the middle of the week, again, this covenant was a 7-year commitment. He breaks it in the middle of that 7 years. Okay? After 3.5 years, he puts a stop to sacrifice grain offering. And then what's mentioned? Here we go. On the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even a complete destruction. One that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. Notice a repetition here. Okay, the one who makes desolate. So, who is the one? Well, likely this he, which points back to the prince mentioned. So, one who makes desolate likely the he, which is the prince. And notice, makes desolate, complete destruction. But this particular desolation or destruction is on the wing of abominations. So I don't think it's just talking about destroying the city again, right? Because the city by this time and the temple are rebuilt for the 3rd time. I think here there's something else. That in the middle of the week, there's going to be some abominable action by this he, or the one who makes desolate. And that's been referred to as later as the abomination
of desolation.
Okay. It's referred to in, I think, is it Daniel 12? Yeah, if you look ahead, again, if we cheat a little bit here, look ahead to Daniel 12. This is speaking of the end time. From the time the regular sacrifice is abolished, okay, here's an echo to Daniel 9:27. And the abomination of desolation is set up. All right, that's exactly what's described in verse 27. $1290 days. So he's saying from this point in time, there's 1290 days to the end. After that. He describes it at the end of days. Okay, so this is but this isn't mentioned in Daniel 9. Okay, this is Daniel's hearkening back to that. And it's this abomination of desolation that should come to your mind. Someone else talks about this. Anybody remember? Somebody in the future who refers to this?
Jesus.
Yeah, when?
Olivet Discourse.
Yes, very good. Therefore, when you see what? The abomination of desolation. Which one? This is a specific event, which was spoken of through the prophet Daniel, or Daniel the prophet. And in this context, remember, Jesus is answering the 3 questions from the disciples. Tell us, when will these things happen? That is the destruction of the temple. That's what Jesus just said. When's that going to happen, Jesus? What will the sign of your coming be? And what's the sign of the end of the age? So 3 questions they have here. Jesus answers the first question here. when the temple would be destroyed. And then he answers the second question here, which is, what will be the sign of his coming? When you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, then run. Because now, remember, we're in the abomination of desolation happens when? According to Daniel, it's 9.
The middle of
the middle of the 7, the 70th 7.
Yeah.
So when that happens, and then we learn at the end of Daniel 12, there's going to be another 1290 days, which, by the way, 3.5 years is 1260 days on the lunar calendar. So basically 3.5 years after the middle of the 70th 7 is the end. But that period of time is going to be bad. And that's exactly what Jesus describes here. Unless those days. What days? The days from the middle of the 70th 7 to the end, there will be a great tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of the world. Which tells you something, because there was a worldwide flood. So this is worse in some way. Okay. Now, again, I'm jumping ahead now here. But I think it should be easier to have a picture in your mind what's going on by better understanding what in the context, what Daniel chapter 9 is talking about. So really, Daniel 9 allows us to piece together the events fairly specifically. Now, again, Daniel wouldn't know the start date from the time of the rebuild of Jerusalem to the coming Messiah, and he wouldn't know there's a gap between 69-7 and the 70th 7. But as we talked about, when you're studying Old Testament prophecy, remember, the prophets often would either mix or mix or not give us clear understanding between first and second comings.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, guys, is what he highlights here. The first coming, he mentions, doesn't he? At the end of the 69 sevens. Now we know, Daniel doesn't say it in Daniel 9, but we know at the end of the 70th 7 is the second coming. So here, 69 sevens brings us to the first coming. There's a gap, an unknown period of time. Then we hit the 70th 7, and at the end of the 70th 7 is the second coming. The end of the 69 sevens, the first coming. The end of the 70th 7, the second coming. And a gap in between. You follow?
Yeah.
And this gap shouldn't bother us or stump us, because it's like I said, you know, a lot of times, like in Isaiah 9:6, the prophet jumps from first to second comings within just a few words in verse 6. That's not unusual. And again, Daniel would not necessarily have understood a gap there. He probably would have conflated that into one period of time, as the rabbis often did, trying to interpret prophecies. They would conflate, because they didn't know, as we do later, that the prophet was speaking of the first and second coming together. Yeah, Robbie.
As we're studying this Old Testament passage, we can't stop ourselves from reading into this what we know in the New Testament. But how do we? Is that fine, or because I think my second question is, so how do we stop ourselves from not interpreting this, again, trying to understand this from the perspective of Daniel, who had no knowledge of of what we know in the New Testament.
Well, Daniel wouldn't know all the specifics, but certainly he would know, and the people he give this to would know a lot, right? Again, because he would know there's a period of 483 years between the rebuilding of Jerusalem to the Messiah.
Mm.
He wouldn't know when that starts. He might guess or
Mm.
assume it's, very soon. Because he's probably in his mind thinking the rebuild of that Jerusalem will get rebuilt right away. And that actually didn't happen.
Mm.
It was over a period of time. Okay. So he wouldn't know the specific dates, but he would know the sequence of events. And yes, he wouldn't know who the prince is or the people who then destroy the city later. But he would know this is going to happen in the time period of the Messiah. Because it came, right after it's described there. He wouldn't know of a gap between the 69th 7 and the 70th 7. But what he would know is in the 70th 7, that this one who makes desolate, who's connected to the people who destroy the temple, he knows that guy is going to make a covenant with God's people and will break it in the middle of the covenant, and then will commit an abominable act of destruction, etc.
Yeah.
So he's going to know those details. He's not going to know names and specific times, their dates, but he's going to know.
Like,
Yeah.
no, I guess what I'm trying to ask Tim is, there's, how do we stop ourselves from immediately reading what we know from the New Testament into this prophetic passage? Sort of like a shortcut. Oh, I know what this is referring to immediately, so that we don't how do I put this? Or is it all right to interpret this almost immediately with what we know from the New Testament? I don't know if I'm phrasing my question correctly.
Well, that's why I took the approach that I did, is first, let's look at the
Yeah.
context, okay?
Mm.
And let's see, what is it that this prophecy is addressing? Like we would a parable,
Yeah.
right? If you're preaching a parable, you don't just jump to the parable, or you shouldn't.
Mm.
You should explain what brought about the parable, right? What's the background to
That's
it?
right.
So do the same thing with prophecy.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the flow of thought? What's the context? What's happening here? Who is the prophecy giving, or who is it given to, or what prompted the prophecy? What's the message of the, understand the book as a whole, all that stuff you do first.
Yeah.
Then when you get to it, first try to just understand its meaning in the context, like we did. What's the city? Who are the people? What is the what's being answered? Well, his prayer for forgiveness, his prayer for God to restore Jerusalem, to keep his promise. So that's what's here. So God answers that prayer and expands on it. But it's all related to Daniel's prayer. This is what anchors us, because if we just look at this only through the New Testament, we're going to fall into the same trap as our covenantal brothers do, which is extract it from the context. So try to do as much understanding of it in the context first. And then, it's fine to bring in what we know later. There's no problem with that. Like we did. We talked about Matthew 24. We even looked later in Daniel 12. So that's fine to do, but you will best understand what comes later the more effort you give to understanding what's in the text itself. So then when Daniel 12 refers to the abomination of desolation, and following that, the end of the sacrifice, we know exactly, he's talking about what he said in Daniel 9. And then he says 1290 days after that. So I would say, right, first you got to understand and teach the context there of the prophecy. And then from the context, what can we understand of the prophecy? And then, you can sort of All right, have this been fulfilled? If you remember in prophetic analysis, that is the last step when you analyze a prophecy. Has this prophecy is it mentioned anywhere else? Has it been fulfilled? So I kind of jumped to that in our discussion. But it's better to try to interpret it as much as possible within its context first. And then, like I said, we can fill in some things after that because of what we know later, because we're clear in our understanding of what was said within the context of the prophecy itself. Did that answer your question? Or
Yeah, it does. So can we say also based on verses 24 and following, could we say that implied here also is God answering the immediate request of Daniel regarding the sanctuary, regarding the temple, because he in verse 17 he prayed that God's face shine on your desolate sanctuary. So it's like a prayer for the Lord to do something about the temple. Can we say that although the Lord did not answer that directly in verses 24 to and following, but really gives him another answer of another prophecy?
well, I think
Could we?
I would say it more that he does answer, but he broadens his answer.
Oh yeah, that's the way you put it earlier.
Yeah, he doesn't dismiss or ignore. His answer is in the flow of thought in the request of Daniel, but he's going to actually give Daniel more than what he asks for. As far as an understanding of, so it's just it's almost yes, but you got to think bigger here, Daniel. Let me tell you the bigger picture. There will be restoration. How do we know that? Well, because he's talking about the Messiah coming and the fact that there will be sacrifices being made. So, and that Jerusalem he does say rebuild. All right. So yeah, Jerusalem be rebuilt, but you know what? It's going to get destroyed again. So, but it will be rebuilt. But the time from that rebuilding to then the Messiah comes. Messiah. Okay. Yeah. Isaiah talked about that. Jeremiah talked about that. Even Micah talked about that. Many of the minor prophets and the prophets spoke of the Messiah or the kingdom already. So really only Zechariah, Haggai, and Malachi are the only prophets that had yet to speak on those things, but others had already. So I lost my train of thought. But yeah, his prayer, was answered, but he was given a much broader, expanded answer as to what's going to happen, not just in the next few years, Daniel, but in the next till the end of history. And like I said, I find the things that really, really stick out to me are the number 70. Just to link it to, they've gone through 70 years. Let me tell you about 77-year periods, Daniel, which is going to cover both to the first coming and then the second coming. Both of the markers, the end of the 69 years, first coming, end of the 70th year, 70th period of 7 years, second coming. Now, he doesn't mention second coming here specifically. He only mentions the abomination of desolation and the covenant being broken. But he does mention a 7-year period. And he mentions the middle of that period. And then, at that point now, once we understand, okay, what's being revealed here, what the original author, speaker intended, then we can step back and go, okay, is any of this mentioned elsewhere in the Bible? What has any of it been fulfilled? And that's where we can start trying to make connections to other places. In fact, one connection of that middle of the 7-year period, I would consider Second Thessalonians has something to say, I think, in relation to that. Who has not read yet? Harris, can't remember if you had or not, but can you go ahead and read
Yes,
verses?
Mr. Tim.
Yeah, verses 1 to 4 of Second Thessalonians. Can you read that for us?
2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verses 1 to 4. Now we request you, brethren, with regard to the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, that you not be quickly shaken from your composure, or be disturbed either by a spirit or a message or a letter as if from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. Let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God.
Okay, so you know, I would connect this to the abomination of desolation. And notice the coming of our Lord. So we're talking about period at the time of the second coming, Paul is. Let no one in any way deceive you. That second coming will not happen until the apostasy comes first. The man of lawlessness is revealed, who opposes, exalts himself above every, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. I think that is the abomination of desolation. Myself. That's my opinion, my interpretation. But knowing that Paul's talking about this time period, he's speaking of the man of lawlessness rising up. And what does he do? Takes a seat in the temple of God. Again, remember the temple. That means that this is a temple that's been rebuilt. When Paul wrote this, right, Herod's temple was in place, but that one got destroyed. 20 years after this, 15 years later. So this is another temple in the future. And so in the time when the Lord comes, just before that coming, this event's going to take place. And he's called the son of destruction. All right, so I would take this myself if I'm doing that last step where I'm trying to see, is there any other scripture that refers to Daniel 9? I think this I would link this one to it. Now, Daniel's not mentioned. Abomination of desolation is not mentioned explicitly, like Jesus mentioned in Matthew 24. But we're in the time period of the second coming, and the son of destruction is described. So, and it speaks of this major event, right? Paul says, you're going to know there's going to be this major event that's going to happen before the Lord's return. So I connect this one. Yeah, Robbie.
Can we reference what Daniel said in Daniel 11? Verse 31.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or is that something else? Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary for it to do away with a regular sacrifice, because that's what Daniel 9 references. And then they will set up the abomination of desolation.
Yeah, let's look at that. Then I want to answer Athan's question that he asks there. Oops. So yeah, Robbie mentions Daniel 11. Now remember Daniel 11. So here you'd have to, Robbie, you'd have to go in and do the context here and all that stuff. Okay, again, another in the first year of Darius, so same year of Daniel 9.
Mhm.
Daniel's given this vision or prophecy about 3 more kings are going to stand in Persia, then a 4th. So he's okay. Now, chapter 11, I believe, is the 62 sevens. He's dealing in this time period now. And he speaks of kings remaining in Persia, then the kingdom of Greece will arise, a mighty king will stand. Again, he doesn't know who that is. We know that's Alexander the Great.
Mhm.
And then Alexander the Great, as soon as he stands, so he'll rise to power, he'll
Oh.
dominate the region, then he's going to be gone. His kingdom will be broken up. And that's exactly what happened, right? In fact, Daniel 11 is so accurate that that's why most liberal scholars dismiss Daniel as being written before 200 BC. Because they
Oh,
say
there it is. I've
it's
seen
so
it.
accurate, he had to have written this after all these things happened. Okay, so anyway, right, Alexander the Great, right, he dies immediately, right, died of syphilis at a young age.
Mhm.
And then his kingdom was broken up into 4 pieces. All right. And so then this describes the events over a period of time as the, you know, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. So there's 4 generals that take a piece of
Yeah.
each of his empire. And then this discusses really the north and the south. So the Egyptian area and the Israel area, Babylon area, and how the north and south go at each other. And then rises up a king of the north. So this is the Seleucids. Now, Seleucid isn't used here. I'm using a
Mhm.
later on, but we call him the king of the north.
Yeah.
Whoops. Rises up. And again, we see this in history that the Seleucids are fighting with the Ptolemies, the southern kingdom. And then it speaks of this one who rises up amidst this one who rises up as king of the north, and he gains power, sets his heart against king of the south. This is Antiochus Epiphanes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Antiochus
Yeah, he
Epiphanes
does.
commits an abomination of desolation.
Mhm.
But this is
Yeah,
a
that's
different
right.
one. By smooth words, he will turn to godliness. So this he here in the context is this king of the north.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, what's interesting historically, it's not mentioned here. The only thing mentioned here is he sets up an abomination of desolation.
Mm.
Similar terminology to what Daniel used in Daniel 9. This king will speak astonishing things against the God of gods. Right? This is going to be similar. He's kind of a type of the Antichrist, really. But what he did, and it's not mentioned here, but historically, we know in the time of the Maccabees, he actually established the sacrifice of pigs in the temple.
Right.
And he subjugated the Jews, was harsh. And then the Maccabeans rose up against him, and God granted them victory. And that's the Feast of Hanukkah, is in celebration of that. 160 something BC. I forget the exact date. So I think Daniel 11 is talking about that period of time up to
That's right.
you know, when Antiochus Epiphanes, and then it transitions from there to Daniel 12, which is the 70th seven.
Yeah.
So I think what we see in
I forgot
Daniel
about
is really the scope of history. Remember, the book is focused on these 4 kingdoms, which are going to be crushed by God's kingdom, and the Messiah will rise up, right? That's the focus here, God's sovereign plan in human history. And so really that plan is described by this 70 period of 77s. And I think Daniel 9 to the end really covers that 77, or really Daniel 11 and 12. Because at the end of Daniel 11, we're at just before the Romans come and take over. Now, Roman Empire is, you know, covered in the New Testament. That's who's reigning at that time. But But really, we have no biblical history of the time period between Malachi and Christ, do we? That's the period of silence of the prophets. But Daniel does give us some insight into the events, some key events that happened regarding Israel in that time. And remember, that time is the 69 sevens. From rebuilding of Jerusalem, which is the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, Malachi is not after that. And this kind of leads me to, you know, one question that often comes up is why did Gabriel say the 7 sevens plus the 62 sevens? Why didn't he say the 69 sevens? You ever thought about that? One theory that I think I read from Pastor MacArthur and others subscribe to it, and I think it makes sense, is that that 7-year period of sevens is from the rebuilding of the temple until Malachi, until the final words of the final inspired text of Scripture. And the timing does almost work. You know, 7 sevens would be 49 years. The rebuilding of the wall, or rebuilding of Jerusalem, is 445 BC. 49 years puts us around, 400 BC, which was about when Malachi prophesied. So that could make sense. So basically, it's marking the end of the Old Testament. God speaking. And then 62 sevens from that time. That's possible. That's the most reasonable interpretation I've heard of that. But that period of silence, we are given some insight into the events in that period, at least as it relates to Israel in Daniel chapter 11. And even Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, it mentions this third kingdom that would rise up, But Daniel 11 tells us what happens. That kingdom dissipates rather quickly into these 4 sub-kingdoms that take place. And then the Messiah comes. So like I said, Daniel reveals, quite a bit of helpful details historically. That not only the 69 sevens, but then he opens up this 7-year period. That's the first time in the Bible, by the way, where this 7-year period is described, which of course Revelation 6 to 19 tells us exactly what happens in that 7-year period. Jesus alludes to it in Matthew 24. He describes this period of great tribulation from the abomination of desolation. Following, there's this great tribulation, and of course Revelation gives us all the details of that. Now Athan asked a question in the chat about God giving Daniel right perspective through the vision, that Daniel's focus was with his people and the temple and the city, and that God wanted to kind of go beyond that. And I think, yeah, in a sense that this prophecy is still very Israel centric, because it is speaking specifically of your city, your people, but of course it's on a much broader scale than what Daniel was anticipating. He's just thinking, in his own time period, God wants to forgive him more than that. And that's what we see in Zechariah as well, that it's not just about building the temple that's important to God. It's what that temple represents, what it's connected to, and how it fits into the broad plan of God in human history. That one day on that Temple Mount, the Messiah will reign. And Zechariah 14 describes the nations coming to him to worship. But here, I do think, as with most prophecy in the Old Testament, it is Israel-centric. But that doesn't mean it's to the exclusion of the rest of the world, because we know from the Abrahamic covenant, God's intent is for God's people to be a blessing to the whole world, and that God intends to reach the whole world, but his plan is to do it through Israel. So that's who the Messiah comes from Israel, as we looked at the past few sessions, looking at the kingdom of God, and that as the disciples asked, God will restore his kingdom to Israel, but it's not just for Israel. That all the nations are a part of that. So, a lot to take in, but and I know I did most of the talking this morning, but hopefully I just want to give you sort of an approach that I think we need to take when we look at prophetic passages. And then yes, we're going to look ahead, because that's part of what we need to do, now that we are in the future. But we want to make sure we understand what's going on in the context of the passage and how it would have been understood, to protect us from importing interpretation either too prematurely or incorrectly.
Yeah.
But yeah, Robbie.
I think also the way you answered that last question, when I referenced Daniel 11, is a good reminder to all of us, because sometimes we look at the scripture references to particular passages we're looking at, but as we go to the reference, we need to check the context of that passage. I completely forgot about Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. So, but the way you answered it is really a reminder that although it is referenced as or it is mentioned as a reference passage because of the phrase abomination of desolation, when we go to the passage, it's so important to see its context first.
Yes.
So the way you answered that reminded us of that. At least reminded me of that.
All right, good. Any other thoughts before we close our time? Questions? Really a lot.
Pastor,
Yeah, go ahead, man.
with regarding with regarding to bringing our knowledge of the New Testament and the whole Bible in interpretation, is it correct, Pastor Tim, that both we, the dispensationalists and the covenantalists, bring in the New Testament to the interpretation, because that is inevitable in recognizing the progress of revelation, that in the progress of revelation, things are made clear and they come into fuller picture as we have the whole canon. But the difference is the covenantalists impose some certain understanding on Old Testament passages that is not faithful to the context, while we bring in the New Testament, yet we still honor the authorial intent of the Old Testament writers. Is that a correct way of putting it, Pastor?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. It's first recognizing the context, trying to understand the original author and what he would have understood, what he would have what he was communicating to his hearers, that we want to understand that first. And really the intent of the message, how it fits in the context. And then, yes, part of our, now that we live post-cross, certainly we can look back and see, okay, where does this connect to elsewhere in the Bible, as we would any passage, right? We're always thinking that way, whether we're in the New Testament as well. We're thinking about, okay, the doctrines that I see here, what I see in this passage, how does it connect to other parts of the Bible? So yeah, we would do that here. It's just, you want to interpret it in light of the original author and audience first, as much as you can. And like I tried to do when we went through this, is to really understand, or seek to understand, that by taking a literal approach, not assuming any symbolism or figurative language or spiritualizing of the text, just let's take it for plainly as it's given, try to understand that, and then at the right time bringing in, okay, so now the Messiah has come and Jerusalem has been rebuilt, so we can now, understanding that's what he's talking about there, import or refer to other passages of scripture. And then, like I did 2 Thessalonians, I try to now, I think there's connections to be made there with the one who made the covenant in Daniel 9. But I don't start with 2 Thessalonians. I don't start with the New Testament, or I don't use it prematurely, and that's an interpretive decision. But I think, yeah, our covenantal brothers, because there's the underlying assumption that Israel's done as a nation in God's redemptive program, that can't be the interpretation of this passage. So, I mean, that's a big presupposition that's brought into interpretation that we as premillennials wouldn't make. We would just say, okay, let's just understand it as the author would understand it and his audience. Let's start there. And then understand in the context. Then, once we have that, okay, now I have more details, as you said, Manny, the progress of Revelation. There's more stuff now that can fill in, that can give us the more details, but Daniel wouldn't have had all of those details at his time. And we want to be able to answer, okay, what is being addressed here in the text? It's God's fulfillment or answer to Daniel's prayer, specific to his people, specific to Jerusalem. So we want to recognize that God was answering that question, not ignoring it, and not saying that, he is going to fulfill that promise, and that there's even a broader picture that he wants Daniel to be aware of, in keeping his covenant with his people. But I don't know, I think the way you said it, Manny, was a good way to state it. I'm just sort of re-expressing it in light of our discussion, but does that make sense?
Very much, Pastor. Thank you. Helpful. You're so helpful, as usual.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think a big part of this, again, hermeneutics is everything. So how you approach these passages, if I approach it from the New Testament, thinking, okay, Matthew 13, Luke 24, Israel's no longer in God's program. Now it's the church. So if I put that on before I look at the text and use that as my presupposition, boy, that really is going to affect how I look at the passage. And then even if I say, okay, if I presuppose there is a future for Israel and look at the path, that'll affect my interpretation too. But that's not, neither of those is the right approach. The right approach is say, okay, let me understand what's the author's context, what prompts this prophecy, and what does that mean in the context? oh, what it means in the context, there is a future for Israel here. Okay, so I don't presuppose it. I let the text speak for itself with the literal interpretation in the context, as we do every other passage, as Daniel did reading Jeremiah. Again, he took it literal. It's like, and expected God to fulfill his promise to his people. So we should come at it the same hermeneutical approach as Daniel had. Why do we change that? Anyway, I'll get on that soapbox every time, but because I just think it's to me it's plain. But yeah, I could understand it if I'm presupposing sort of that Israel's done, then you know I'm gonna come at the passage differently. All right, well, we've gone a little bit over time here, but any final thoughts or remarks or questions or disagreements, arguments from you guys? Anything? Okay.